Welcome to BCG on Compliance. I'm Hanjo Seibert, and in this special year-end episode, we're highlighting the stories that really shaped this year's podcast. In the past 12 months, we explored how drug cartel money can flow around the world, how fraud evolved to an organized, global industry, and how deepfakes are starting to become more and more dangerous. To look at some of the biggest topics covered on the podcast, I'm joined by my co-host Katharina Hefter, Global Lead for Compliance and Crisis Management at BCG. She hosted a great conversation with Dr. Simone Kämpfer on AI and white-collar crime earlier this year. And I thought it would be a good idea to have her here. Katharina, welcome.
Thank you, Hanjo. Thanks for having me. It's been quite a year on where technology, regulation, and human behavior collided in fascinating ways. And I'm happy to discuss exactly how that happened on the podcast today.
In this episode, we'll revisit the moments that stood out to us and share what we think 2026 will mean for compliance teams around the world. AI was a constant topic on the podcast this year. And while the majority of the time we looked at how it can help us to become more compliant and be more efficient in stopping illicit money flows, there was also the specter of AI as a dangerous new frontier. In 2025, AI deepfakes moved from novelty to weapon. These are AI videos, images, or voices that perfectly mimic that of real-life individuals. And as we heard in your conversation with Simone Kämpfer, Katharina, one case in particular made compliance teams take notice.
A UK engineering firm lost 25 million in a deepfake attack last year. What happened? One of its employees received a message about an urgent confidential transaction, allegedly from the company's CFO in the UK. And although he was quite skeptical at first, his doubts were allayed after a video call with colleagues. What the man didn't know was that the other supposed colleagues participating on the call were all deepfakes, AI-generated replicas of real people. But believing the people to be real, he followed their instructions and transferred the relevant amount. I think there's a lack of widespread understanding of this issue and how the threat really is. This is also shown by a recently published study. And according to that, only 22% of companies are properly protected, despite that the fact that AI fraud is expected to become one of the biggest cyber threats in 2025. I do think that there is a certain awareness for the problem, but so far, in my view, too little is being done in a way of effective protection.
This story really stayed with me, I have to admit. It's such a chilling example, and what really stands out is how believable it all seemed. The employee wasn't careless. They were convinced by faces and voices that felt real to them. That's what makes this kind of fraud so dangerous. It exploits trust, not technology. And it shows why awareness and healthy skepticism are becoming as critical to compliance as any technical control.
I think it's a great point, Katharina. And maybe fun story about the podcast. When I mispronounced a name and I didn't have my recording equipment with me, we actually also used Gen AI to re-record that sentence with me pronouncing the name correctly. And when I listened to it, so my own voice, and I knew which sentence it was that was AI generated, I couldn't distinguish that one sentence from what I had said before and after. And that was really, really kind of shocking to me as well. And I also remember a conversation we had with Carsten Helm here on the podcast, and he was advocating for something called a family password. So something that only, for example, you and I know that I can ask you, in which I can verify, hey, it's really Katharina. It's not a Gen AI. It's only something that I have shared personally with you. And so I can identify you. And I think those kind of controls and checks will become more important, and also how we train people to use those things and recreate that trust that you were talking about that is being penetrated.
I really like that idea with the code word, Hanjo, and certainly something that we should probably leverage much more going forward.
I mean, Katharina, in your discussion also that you had, I was wondering, what's your view on, do we need to now train a quote unquote human firewall, or how do we equip people with the right tools to actually act responsibly and identify the scam from the real request?
So honestly, Anya, from my experience, it's these days a lot about transparency, awareness. People need to know these examples and see them in real life, in essence. They need to be informed about it and they need to understand what can go wrong in order to be able to act on it. So to me, it's all about awareness. So whenever something happens at our clients, for example, then also share it more broadly with all employees and make sure that everyone is aware it doesn't happen again. That is key at this stage.
One of my favorite episodes this year was our conversation with Robert Mazur. He was a former US federal agent who spent time undercover as a money launderer embedded deep inside the Median and Cali cartels. Mazur showed us that the cartels didn't survive in isolation. They relied on bankers, lawyers, and professionals who enabled the flow of dirty money. What struck me wasn't just the scale of his operations. It was the warning about how legit institutions can become blind to their own role in enabling crime. Mazur says this told him that this disconnect is often not about bad actors, but about the wrong incentives.
I have found that those banks that wind up getting themselves in trouble suffer from what I call dual brain syndrome, two brains. The sales side is motivated by profit. The compliance side is motivated by efficiently executing compliance. And it's very, very difficult to instill within the people on the sales side a vigorous embracing of compliance when by outing one of their accounts and saying, you know, guys, I think we really should be looking more closely into this because when this account came on, it looked better, but I'm noticing this transition in the format of their business model and it's taking on more risk. And I think compliance should take a harder look at this. And they take a harder look and they say, yeah, you know, we've got to close this account. Well, the person on the sales side just lost a pretty good number because they were making decent money based upon the deposits that were coming in. It's up to management to come up with some type of financial incentive for people on the sales side to do that. Come up with some type of reward for that person on the sales side to lessen the pain for having put the bank before their personal profits. And we might see a little bit more of a molding of the two brains into one.
The idea of two brains in one bank really stayed with me. Mazur wasn't just describing corruption, he was describing conflict. The constant tug of war between profit and principle.
This is such a vivid image, and it still feels true today. You can have brilliant compliance processes, but if people are discouraged from speaking up or for walking away from bad business, the culture hasn't really changed.
And this also reminds me of something that Satnam Lihal, a senior compliance leader, said in another episode this year. He put it perfectly. Behind every no in compliance, there is a real human cost.
You are conscious that there are people here, very good, nice, well-meaning people who may have spent 6 months, a year, maybe even longer, working on this transaction that they've brought you into, where you're about to say, possibly no, but possibly really hard to do it in the way that you really, really wanted to do it. Even if their response is perfect, it does take its toll. We will get more pleasure out of pleasing than displeasing others. It's just human nature. I think senior management, CEOs and boards would benefit from being reminded of that.
So I think this two brains in one organization is a really nice concept. And Katharina, what's your view on how can companies combine and mold these two brains, profit and compliance and principles, into one?
So from my perspective, I wouldn't call it profit and compliance. I would refer to opportunity and risk a bit more broadly, which are two sides of a coin. And business is about taking risks, yes, but ideally in a conscious manner. So with all business decisions, we need to look at both sides, the opportunity entailed, but also the risk associated. and then manage the associated risks appropriately. That is what business should be all about. And sometimes, and we see this in our work, in our client work, that sometimes we might over focus on the opportunity and forget a bit about the risk. And that is, I think, where we all need to strengthen the muscle and see the risks that we have associated with the opportunities and then manage them appropriately. And it's not about not doing business, but about doing it in a way that is safeguarded in the appropriate manner.
And in your view and your experience, should companies in general, should they start including conduct and integrity metrics in their bonus structures, say in the same way as banks now do with their risk and culture targets?
Yes, I believe so. I'm sure this is an important measure to ensure that risk, integrity, ethics, however they are appropriately reflected. When we talk about culture change, we often look into not only changing behavior, but changing context in order to change behaviors. And one part of that context is certainly the incentive system that needs to fuel the right discussions and ensure that decisions are taken in a balanced manner.
Another conversation that stood out this year was with Tom Harden, better known as Tipper X. Tom was a young hedge fund analyst in New York who at 28 crossed an ethical line for the first time. That one decision led to an FBI investigation, a wire, and ultimately to him becoming one of the most prolific cooperating witnesses in Wall Street history.
6:30 in the morning, I'm leaving my Manhattan apartment to go drop off some dry cleaning. And somebody behind me on the street on 8th Avenue says, "Are you Thomas Kobe Harden?" My full name. And the only time somebody's ever said that to me is my mother when I was in trouble. So I turned around. It was 2 FBI agents, dark suits, wallets out, like any American crime show people have seen. That's seen FBI come sit down with us. So we sat down at a fast food restaurant in Manhattan. And he said, "Look, man, we know about your 4 trades. We know that you were just down in Georgia visiting your baby nephew for his baptism last weekend." And he knew my nephew's name. And my first thought was, oh my God, my dad's going to kill me. What's he going to say? You know, I'm only my 20s still. And I thought, oh my God, my wife's going to leave me. We just got married. She had no idea. And then I thought, oh my gosh, this might impact my career. Oh my God, I might be going to prison.
So, Hanjo, I remember the podcast very vividly, I have to say. It really struck me, and I couldn't stop listening in. When you think back, what stayed on your mind in particular?
I think what most stayed with me was courage. From a perspective of, one, the courage that Tom didn't have in the situation where at some point he felt he's missing out and he needs to do the same thing that the people around him are doing. And courage in the other sense that he was working with the FBI to do what he understood was wrong behavior before. And then lastly, courage also in the company he's now built with Tipper X, educating others and organizations around how to change the context for people, how to help and empower people to actually, who want to do the right thing, to do the right thing, and to not lose their inner compass of what ought to be right, even if you're under pressure.
So, Hanjo, on that courage point, what do you think in that instance we can learn also for other organizations and companies across the globe? What are the right ingredients or prerequisites to ensure that people actually dare to speak up and raise their voice?
Great question. 3 things come into my mind is, one, as an organization or as an institution, what governance and what structure do we create where people are able to speak up, where a diverse dialogue is being encouraged, where also diverse set of people are coming together to form high-performing teams. So I think that diversity in the governance or context that you set as an organization is very important. And thinking that through also from a diversity of the dialogue perspective, I think is very important. Second, if we take a step back, and maybe the kind of holiday season, New Year type period is a good time to step back. If we as leaders step back and think about what role model are we to the younger generations, and what example do we set by what we say, but even more importantly, by our actions? And the Tom Harden example makes it very, very clear that he was still a white piece of paper when he entered the industry out of university. And a lot of the habits he assumed was what he saw from people around him, and especially the bosses and the successful people around him. So I think reflecting and thinking about what do we as leaders do and how can we lead people to creating that inner compass at the beginning of their career, I think is very important. And my third and last point is also that we do think about this from a recruiting perspective. Who are the people we want to have in our company? Who are the people we want to invest and be the next generation to lead our companies? And not only the qualifications on the CV, but also what is their behavior? Where have they stood out? Where have they spoken up? How have they brought diversity into something? Where have they faced challenges and how have they overcome them? And how do they deal with those? So I think also being aware of these kind of points in the vitae of people that we recruit as companies, to me, is very important. So looking forward to 2026, Katharina, what do you think will be the biggest trends or the single biggest trend for the next year to come?
So Hanjo, from my perspective, it will be tech/AI/analytical and the potential that we see to increase effectiveness and efficiency in the compliance management systems leveraging this. Hanjo, anything to add from your perspective?
So I think that technology for sure will have its role in 2026. And my question is, how do we empower people and leaders to become even more effective leaders? And how do we not forget about the human element in this? And I don't mean human in the loop in our processes as we automate more, but really to step back and think for compliance leaders, but any leader in any company, how do we make sure we are we are encouraging and motivating leaders for the people that shape the future of our companies and the business? So I do think there's a trend that's probably underweighted right now around executive management and leadership education. My thanks to everyone who joined us this year to share their insights, and especially to my co-host, Katharina Hefter.
Thanks so much, Hanjo.
And we'll be back next year with more stories on BCG on compliance. Join the conversation by connecting with us on your podcast app, writing a review of the show, or emailing us at bcgoncompliance@bcg.com. Be sure to subscribe to get more insights from compliance innovators. For the last time in 2025, I'm Hanjo Seibert. Thank you for listening.